Before we begin, let me say this. If you like stories like these, please consider subscribing. It helps us share more voices, more memories, more truths that shouldn't be forgotten. And please, in the comments, tell me where you are watching from. I'm an old woman now, but it means the world to me to know who is listening to my words and from what corner of this world. Now, let me take you into my life. I worked until my hands were raw, until my back bent in ways that never straightened again. I worked until the nights blurred into mornings, until the sound of coins in my palm was the only proof I hadn't collapsed in vain. I worked until there was nothing left to give, except the love I carried for my only daughter. And after all of it, after the years and decades, she looked at me and said the words that broke me more than any sickness ever could. "You're in the way." I remember the first day I held her. The smell of milk still clung to my skin, and the nurse whispered, "She's strong, this one." I was only 24, a girl myself in many ways, but when I looked into those wide, trusting eyes, I swore to the silent room, "I will give you everything. I will make sure you never suffer like I did." Back then, life seemed almost kind. My husband was alive, my hands were strong, and the house was small but filled with warmth. We didn't have much, but what we had felt enough laughter, enough bread on the table, enough hope for tomorrow. But dreams are expensive, and the world doesn't hand them out freely. My daughter deserved better shoes than mine, a better coat for the winter, a better school to shape her future. So I traded my sleep for shifts, my comfort for long hours on factory floors that smelled of oil and sweat. I remember the sound of the sewing machines, hundreds of them in a hall where women bent over their stations like shadows chained to a rhythm. Needles clicking, threads snapping, the foreman's boots echoing across the concrete. That was my world, 12 hours at a time, 6 days a week, with aching eyes and fingers stiff from cold. And yet, each night, when I opened the door and saw her asleep, cheeks flushed in the dim light, I told myself it was worth it. I could endure anything if it meant she would have more than I ever did. There were moments I wanted to collapse, to say enough, but then I remembered her small hand in mine, how she once whispered, "Mama, you'll never leave me, right?" And I answered, "Never. I will always fight for you." I thought love was enough. I thought sacrifice would always be seen. I thought that if I carved out a life with my blood and my body, my daughter would know how deeply she was loved. I was wrong. The years passed like seasons in fast forward. My little girl grew taller, her hair darkened, her laughter filled the house like birdsong in the spring. My husband, God rest him, was a steady presence then. He carried her on his shoulders, fixed her toys when they broke, and kissed her goodnight with the gentleness of a man who had never known such joy until he became a father. But joy doesn't pay bills. The money was never enough. Rent crept higher, food prices rose, and our small savings vanished like dust in the wind. My husband worked as hard as he could, yet it seemed the harder we tried, the more the world demanded. I took on more hours at the factory. When they cut staff, I begged for overtime. When they wouldn't give it, I cleaned houses in the evenings, scrubbing other people's kitchens while my own child ate alone with her father. I told myself it was only temporary, that once we caught up, once we had enough tucked away, I could be home more often. But temporary turned into years. I still remember the first time I came home to find my daughter asleep at the table, homework open, pencil still in her small hand. My heart clenched. She had waited for me. Dinner was cold, her plate barely touched. She had fallen asleep, waiting for her mama to come home. I picked her up, carried her to bed, and whispered apologies into her hair. I promised myself I'd never let it happen again. But it did. Over and over. The sacrifices grew heavier. I skipped meals so she could have seconds. I wore the same coat winter after winter, while she always had a new one for school. My hands cracked from soap and bleach, but her shoes were polished and her books uncreased. Neighbors whispered, "She's spoiling that girl." But I didn't care. A mother's duty isn't to herself. It's to the child who looks at her with trust too big for words. I remember one Christmas when money was tighter than ever. We couldn't afford a tree, so I found branches from the yard, tied them together, and placed them in a bucket filled with stones. I strung popcorn on thread, hung it like garlands, and wrapped her only gift, a second-hand doll I'd scrubbed until her face shone. When my daughter unwrapped it, her eyes lit up like it was made of gold. She hugged me so tightly, whispering, "It's perfect, Mama." That moment kept me alive for years. And yet, while I poured every drop of myself into her future, I felt something shifting inside me, a fatigue no rest could cure, a heaviness in my bones that whispered I was spending my health faster than time could replace it. But I told myself, it doesn't matter. My life was hers to claim. My strength was hers to borrow. My happiness was hers to build upon. What I never realized was how quickly a child stops seeing sacrifice and starts seeing it as something owed. It happened sooner than I expected. Life doesn't knock before it breaks the door. One morning, my husband didn't wake up. No warning, no farewell. A silent thief in the night had stolen him away. His heart had simply stopped. I still remember the way the sunlight fell on his face, so calm, so peaceful, as if he were only sleeping. I shook him, whispered his name, begged him to open his eyes. But the silence in that room was louder than any scream I could have made. My daughter was only 12. She stood in the doorway, her small body trembling, asking, "Mama, why won't he wake up?" I wanted to crumble right there. I wanted to let the world swallow me whole. But when I looked at her, I knew I couldn't. I had to stand, for her. From that day forward, I became both mother and father. I rose before dawn, worked until after midnight, and still tried to keep a smile on my face when she came home from school. I packed her lunches, helped with her homework, and kissed her forehead, hiding the cracks that were spreading inside me. The factory hours grew longer. I took extra shifts no one else wanted. My hands ached so badly at night that I wrapped them in cloth just to dull the pain. On weekends, I scrubbed floors in strangers' houses, washed windows until my vision blurred, ironed clothes that weren't mine, while my own laundry sat in a pile at home. I told myself it was only for a little while, just until she finished her schooling. But a little while stretched into years. My daughter was growing. She became quieter, more distant. She didn't see the sacrifices, only the absences. I'd hear her tell friends, "Mama's always working," as if it were a flaw, not a lifeline. One evening, I came home and found her sitting with a neighbor's wife, eating stew at their table because I hadn't made it back in time to cook. The shame cut me deeper than any wound, but I swallowed it. I told myself, she's fed, she's safe. That's all that matters. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me with a look I couldn't name. Not anger, not love, something colder, something like disappointment. It hurt, but I kept going. What else could I do? I believed that if I carried every burden alone, she'd never have to feel the weight I carried. And then came the day she was accepted into university. I cried like a child. All the nights of hunger, all the years of aching bones, all the grief. It felt worth it in that moment. I had kept my promise. She would have the life I had never known. I hugged her so tightly, my tears soaking her hair. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, and I meant it with every piece of my soul. But as I held her, a whisper crept into my mind, uninvited. "You've given her everything, but what will be left of you?" When she left for university, I stood in the doorway with her bags packed and my heart hollow. I smiled, waved, told her not to worry, that I'd be fine. And I meant it. I wanted her to step into the world unburdened by me. But the silence that filled the house after she was gone was deafening. Every room seemed too large, every meal too quiet. The chair at the table where she used to sit was like a wound that wouldn't heal. Still, I worked. Even though the bills were smaller, I refused to stop. My body was older now, slower. My joints burned with every step, my back screamed with every load. Some mornings, it took me longer to stand from bed than it once had to walk to work. But I pushed through. Because in my mind, I had to keep going. She might need something: books, rent money, medicine. And when she did, I wanted to be ready. I lived for the phone calls. At first, they came often. "Mama, I need this form signed." "Mama, can you send some money for supplies?" "Mama, I miss your soup." Each call felt like a gift, even if it was only for help. But slowly, the calls changed. They became shorter, sharper. Her voice carried impatience, as though I were an obligation instead of her anchor. Sometimes she wouldn't pick up at all. When I asked if everything was all right, she would sigh and say, "I'm busy, Mama. Don't worry so much." I didn't want to worry. I wanted to be proud, to see her stepping into the life I had worked myself raw to give her. But late at night, when the house groaned with age and the air smelled of dust and loneliness, I wondered if she even thought of me at all. Then came the first real sign that my body was failing me. One winter morning, my legs gave out in the street. Groceries scattered, bread soaking in snow, cans rolling into the gutter. I lay there, shaking, strangers stepping past me, until a kind young man lifted me up. He asked if he should call someone. I shook my head. Who was there to call? I went home, bruised and ashamed, clutching the wall as I climbed the stairs. I told no one, not even her, because I didn't want her to think I was weak. I told myself it was just a moment, nothing serious, that I could keep going, that I had to, for her, always for her. But deep down, I felt it, the ground shifting, the years I had borrowed from my body demanding their payment. And though I didn't know it then, the hardest part of my story wasn't the aching bones or the endless nights of work. It was what would come next, when the daughter I had built my life around would look me in the eye and say words that would tear everything I believed to shreds. I thought the worst was behind me. I didn't yet understand. My real tragedy was still waiting,